Please keep in mind that I retired before the COVID epidemic turned all of you into expert users of Zoom. My experiences of teaching online or giving talks online are very, very limited indeed. So if I'm not clear enough or whatever, save it for the questions and I will be happy to answer. Also, for those of you who want to know the characters for the Chinese terms, the titles of books I may mention, they are all carefully listed in the paper which I have sent to the organizers and which I think has been distributed or will be distributed. I'm not going to read that paper. I will make a number of comments on the development of the story of the white snake. First of all, I would like to point out that we call the story of the white snake one of China's 4 great folk tales. The funny thing is that these 4 tales are very, very different. And none is as young and as widely popular as the story of the white snake. The story of the weaving maiden and the herd boy was not really all that popular. The story of Meng Jiangnu was popular, everybody knew it, but it was never made into regular plays, it was never made into novels, and the same applies to the story of Liang Xianpo and Zhu Yingtai. The story of the white snake was extremely popular in Ming and Qing times throughout society, from the emperor, certainly the Qianlong emperor, greatly loved the play on the topic, down to the lower classes. It also resulted in wonderful, very beautiful, in the 18th century, very beautiful New Year prints, which we don't have for the other folk tales. It was repeatedly adapted for the stage. It was repeatedly written up as a novel, and it showed a great capacity to travel also beyond the Jiangnan area where the story originated. We usually link the story up with the city of Hangzhou, but of course the interesting thing is that the story of the white snake links up the 3 big cities of the Jiangnan area, Hangzhou, Suzhou, Zhenjiang, and their 3 major temples. The Thunder Peak Pagoda in Hangzhou and some other monasteries, the great Lütongping Temple in Suzhou, and of course the great temple monastery at Zhenjiang overlooking the Yangtze. And so you have the 3 cities of the Jiangnan area. It's not just a local legend, it combines that whole area into one story, and it is far more popular than any of the other stories. It has given us far more text. Second thing is the history of the story. Southern China from ancient times has had many snake women who were revered as goddesses. And the white snake probably derives from that lineage. I'm interested in the parallel with the, the Lin Shui Furan in Fujian, where we have a triad of goddesses. Guan Yin, one of her hairs becomes the Lin Shui Furan, who is a good goddess, and one of her nail clippings becomes a terrible white snake. Personally, but that's not established, I would not be surprised if the white snake and Kuan Yin clad in white basically are manifestations of the same divine power. There is a very clear link between the white snake and Kuan Yin. People have traced developments of stories, but I think the most important thing is to know that the story as we have it in the San Yan, which is taken by many people as the basic story, Lady Pai is forever imprisoned below Leifeng Pagoda. That story dates, according to Patrick Hannon, was written down probably in the 1st century of the Ming Dynasty. It's a story which he dates to 1250, 1450, his first period, but most likely to the last century of that. I would here once again stress that, in my opinion, Patrick Hannon's dating of Huapen Xiaoshuo, of vernacular tales, is the most systematic attempt ever to do so, and that it was spectacularly certified as good by later discoveries. So I think when we talk about the legend in a recognizable form, informing the white snake, informing the shop clerk in Hangzhou, the move to 3 cities, that story is in place in the early part of the Ming Dynasty. Now, for that story is clearly a demon possession story, a story of male lust. How do men become victims of these kind of snake women? They are easily seduced. In my classes, I always would point out that, yes, the white snake presents herself as a widow, but as a widow who is 18 years old. She is dressed in white and she is drenched by the rain. She is your perfect Miss Wet T-shirt. And if boys don't fall for that kind of women, there's something wrong probably. So it is very much a story of demonic sex and male lust. The demonic quality of the white snake in that vernacular tale is still very much present. And so the only way in which a man can free himself from such demonic possession is when he himself has the power to subdue his lust. So it's not enough for the monk to fight the snake. Actually, the Hua vernacular story is interesting because so many specialists in suppressing demons all fail. It is the man who is confronted with the demon who has to subdue her. So in those stories, she and her servant are both demons, and they are forever imprisoned below the Thunder Peak Pagoda. Now, if you tell a story, you can do it any way you want. If you want to adapt it for the stage, the function and the format of the dramatic adaptation are extremely important in shaping the story. We don't know when this story of the white snake was first adapted for the stage, but it certainly was performed on stage in the late Ming Dynasty. Qi Piaojia evaluates a Leifeng Ji and is very curt in his dismissal. This is a no good play, which probably means it was a popular play, which meant it was performed at temple festivals and other community festivals, and that meant it needed a happy ending. If plays are part of a community festival, they need a happy ending. The second thing is, if you adopt a story like this for a play, and if a man stays in love with a demonic woman for so long, she has to be very nice to him, which means that the role of the white snake is performed by the tam, by the female lead. And that means that she becomes, yes, more and more human. And much more probably than in the vernacular tale. Second thing is, because the play needs a happy ending, you have to find one. And so the most happy ending would be that she is freed from her prison below the pagoda. And who can do that? If she would be a woman, not a demon, if she would be a woman, her son could do it. And so we have in the Chinese tradition a long series of stories in which a sinful woman, because she initiated sex, who is punished by imprisonment below a mountain, below a pagoda, in a deep grave, can be saved by her son if he is a grown-up man who has become a man in its own. Mulian becomes a monk. In the story of Chen Shang, he becomes a Taoist priest. And in the story of the white snake, our son becomes a graduate in the examinations. So we have three ways for sons to establish themselves as independent men with the power to save their mothers. It's my guess, I'm not sure, that such an ending was already present in the late Ming play. When Huang Tupi adapted Feng Bonglung's vernacular tale as a play and did it according to the play, he was very upset because the actors added this ending of the son of the white snake saving his mother. And he writes in his commentary and in his preface to his own play that they immediately came up with all this kind of nonsense. What I think is that this was the way the actors had performed the story already for quite some time, and that they would continue to do so. So if Mr. Huang or who else came up with a new adaptation of the play, which offered in many aspects a better text, that was wonderful, and they would make use of it, but they would not leave out the happy ending, because the function of the play, their livelihood depended upon performing plays that could function as part of a community celebration. There's an interesting aspect. Many scholars have stressed that over the 18th century, the white snakes become more and more human. That is true. But you have to keep in mind that demons cannot sin. Humans can sin, therefore they can atone for their sins and they can be saved. But only those who have sinned need to be punished and to atone for the sins. So in the early versions, it is the white snake and the green snake or the green fish or the blue fish or whatever you want to call it, who are both imprisoned below the Thunder Peak Pagoda. If the white snake becomes human, then there is, and the green snake is just her servant, there is no need to imprison the green snake. And so that doesn't happen. And the green snake remains available to seek revenge. I think that is a interesting development. Most of the scholarship on the traditional version tends to stop not in the 19th century, but at the end of the 18th century, when the second Chuanqi play that has been preserved has been made, probably for the benefit of the Qianlong emperor that comes visiting down south and who loved this play very much, which now includes also the part of her son in freeing the white snake. But of course, the story continued to develop throughout the 19th century. Lu Xun writes somewhere that he didn't know why people always were complaining about Fahai. In the 19th century, the precious scroll, and especially also the Tanzi, are very detailed in complaining about the monk Fahai suppressing the white snake. But the problem is, of course, that the Tanzi is an extremely long work, and very few of us read it. Even reading the summary by Tan Zhengpi and Tan Xun of these Tanzi is already a wearisome task, because the story tends to become so long and so complicated. For my own part, I translated the Precious Scroll because that was translatable in terms of length, and it also gave a neat balance between the part of the white snake herself and the part of her son who has to save her. Now, one thing I think we should not do, and which happens too often in looking at the white snake nowadays, is to treat it as a love story. The idea of romantic love is, as we know it now, and as it's now popular in China, is a product of the 20th century. It's a romantic notion of love. And yes, I'm not denying that apparently the shop clerk and the snake have a loving relationship, but it is one that is, until the end of the 19th century, seen in the context of traditional Chinese thought, where, and don't blame me for this, I do not invent it, where male sexuality is fine, but female sexuality is sinful, especially if women themselves initiate contact, and especially when they give birth. It's very unfair, but it is the traditional way of thought about these things. And so by becoming human, the white snake can sin, and she does, as a sexual being. If we want to make it a story of romantic love, then of course sin is not an issue. And so when Tian Han rewrites the whole story, he simply drops the son. It would, of course, be the best if her husband would have saved her, but he has established himself as a weak-spined, good-for-nothing. So it's difficult to make him a hero in the struggle against oppression. And so Tien Han comes up with the green snake, leading the masses in crushing the Leifeng Pagoda. And he brings together the two elements which Liang Lo has studied so extensively in her works, the elements of love and revolution as part of the avant-garde of the 20th century. But that means that the sun disappears. Tien Han still has the baby being born, but then it disappears from his play. Of course, his play has to be much shorter, and the rebellion comes from the green snake. There actually, and this is again something which in the scholarship on the green snake, to the best of my knowledge, is still largely forgotten. There is quite a body of literature on the green snake after the white snake has been imprisoned below the Thunder Peak Pagoda. And nowadays, more and more of that is becoming available. So that is basically the main stages in the development I see. The white snake starts out as a demon, together with her assistant, the green snake. When she becomes more human over the course of the 17th and 18th century, and I would say especially because of the dramatic adaptations which require a happy ending and which have her performed by the Tan, she becomes a quite different character. She is not a demon who has to be imprisoned for all eternity, but she becomes a human being who can atone for her sins and therefore can be freed in the end. And then when we come in the 20th century and romantic love conquers China, the character is again drastically rewritten because this element of a sin that needs to be atoned disappears from the material. One last remark deals with the international distribution. It's interesting to see that the white snake legend has spread basically throughout East Asia. If you look to Southeast Asia, it is the 19th century version that has become popular. The white snake is saved by her son. In Japan, by contrast, it is Feng Monglong's adaptation, so it's the demon story that is transmitted, and which is then by Ueda Akinari and others adapted as a demon story where the white snake, in a way, becomes more demonic than she ever was in China. That is my basic introduction to the historical development of the story in China, and I leave it happily to, I will mute myself, and so Yang can take over.